the third Sunday of the series on strangers. This is our Sunday teaching program for adults, and we have continued this now for 5 years, and the purpose of it is education. And this series on the stranger or strangers are on some figures in Islamic history that are not so well known to the majority of Muslims. So this one we started out with Al-Khidr alayhi salam, and we went from there to Salman al-Farsi, and from there now we're going to Naaser Khusro, and next we'll have Hassan Sabah, inshallah, and then the Al-Ghaib, Rijal al-Ghaib, inshallah. And that will complete this program. So, as is usual, we begin with the reading of Quran, and then we have, say, Dusty is with us today, and he will read part of one of the poems of Naaser Khusro, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. إنا نحن نزلنا عليك القرآن تنزيلا فاصبر لحكم ربك ولا تطع منهم آثما أو كفورا واذكر اسم ربك بكرة وأصيلا ومن الليل فاسجد له وسبحه ليلا طويلا. إن هؤلاء يحبون العاجلة ويذرون وراءهم يوما ثقيلا. نحن خلقناهم وشددنا أسرهم وإذا شئنا بدلنا أمثالهم تبديلا. إن هذه تذكرة فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه سبيلا. وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله إن الله كان عليما حكيما. يدخل من يشاء في رحمته والظالمين أعد لهم عذابا أليما. صدق الله المولى العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم.
صدق الله. Now, inshallah, Sayyid Dosti will read for us, inshallah, from the poem of a few lines from this poem that we'll be talking about, and I will, when we reach it, I'll let you know those lines, and I'll just let him to go ahead and to read them, inshallah.
الله الرحمن الرحیم. دانا که بگفتمش من این دست ببرزد، صد رحمت هر روز بران دست و بران بر. گفتا بدهم داروی با حجت و برهان، لیکن بنهم مهری محکم بر لبت بر. زافاق و ز انفس و گواها ز لشکر، برخوردنی و شربت و مرد هنر بر. راضی شدم و مهر بکرد آنگه و دارو، هر روز به تدریج همی داد مزو بر. هر روز به تدریج همی داد مزو بر. چون علت زایل شد بگشاد زبانم، مانند معصفر شده رخسار مزعفر. مانند معصفر شده رخسار مزعفر.
This basically says, when he's talking about his teacher, when Nāṣir Khusraw is talking about his teacher, Muayyad, he says that that sage put his hand upon his heart, 100 blessings be upon that hand and heart, and said, I offer you the remedy of proof and demonstration, but if you accept, I shall place a seal upon your lips which must never be broken. I gave my consent, and he affixed the seal, and drop by drop and day by day, he fed me the healing potion, until my ailment disappeared. My tongue became imbued with eloquent speech. My face, which had been pale as saffron, now grew rosy with joy. I, who had been a stone, was now a ruby. I had been dust, and now I was ambergris. And you'll see when I reach it the context of this. And I know, thank you, Said, for coming, because I know you had a busy schedule, but we thank you for coming and helping us with that. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa alayhi wa sallam. Wa amma ba'd. On the 5th of March, which was 23 of Sha'ban in the year 437, in the year 1046 of the Christian era, or the Common Era, a man, his name was Abu Mu'in Nāṣir, son of Khusro, from the town of Kubadian in the district of Marb in northeastern Persia, who described himself as being, quote, a scribe by profession and one of those in charge of the revenue service of the ruler, end quote, leaves his comfortable and somewhat dissolute life of some 40 years behind. When I say somewhat dissolute, I must say that people have misunderstood that he had a very easy life, but he was Hafiz of Quran. He had read both the Injil and the Tanakh. He had read most of the Greek books of wisdom. He was an expert in mathematics and in astronomy and in many, many other subjects. And his life was a life, from his work for the ruler, taking care of accounts, that was filled with study. He was one of those people who were drunk on books and drunk on studying. That's what he loved to do. But anyway, he left this life, and he left that life and all that went with it because he was also very successful, very well thought of. He had a very good reputation. everything was perfect, so as to speak. And he went to Mecca to make Hajj. And he did this on the basis of a spiritual dream, or what we call a ru'ya, which he relates himself as follows, quote, "One night in a dream, I saw someone speaking to me saying, 'How long will you continue to drink of this wine which destroys the intellect of mind?'" This means casual studies and so forth. Because there was no focus to his studies. Some people are enamored with knowledge. They just love knowledge. They love studying. They love reading. It's a kind of spiritual materialism. It's a kind of spirituality which is an expansion on a horizontal plane, but not on a vertical plane. So he says, "How long will you continue with this? If you were to stay sober, in other words, if you were to focus on something, it would be better for you." In reply, I said to him, "The wise have not been able to come up with anything for me other than this to lessen the sorrows of this world." And he said to me, "To be without your senses is no repose. You cannot be called wise when you are led to senselessness. It's better to seek out that which increases one in reason and in wisdom." And I replied, "Where can I find such a thing?" He said, "Seek and you shall find." And at that moment he pointed to the Qibla, the direction of prayer to Mecca, and said no more. Still quoting the poet, "When I awoke, I remembered everything." And that's one of the things of a ru'ya, you remember everything. "I remembered everything which made a truly great impression upon me. And I said to myself, 'You have woken from last night's sleep. But when will you waken up from this sleep of 40 years? When will you wake up for this sleep of 40 years?' And I reflected that until I changed all of my ways, I would never find true happiness." This is in his Safarnama, in the very beginning of the book. He explains how it all happened. This is his travel book, which describes these travels he took. Thus, he made right then the niyyah to do this. It took him a few weeks, actually, for this to happen. And he left everything behind. And he left with his brother and a servant, and they started off on a pilgrimage to Mecca, which he understood when the man pointed to the Qibla that he should go to Mecca and make Hajj. He left on that, and it was but he left on a journey which he didn't know at the time. It wound up taking him 7 years. And he did most of the 2,800 miles of that journey on foot. That's like basically walking across the United States in terms of distance. An account of this journey, which he compiled in the latter period of his life when he was in exile, is this well-known work I mentioned, the Safarnama, in which he used notes that he had taken all along his journey, 7-year journey. And the prose of this book is like a travelogue, which is different from his poetic works and his philosophical works, because he also wrote a tremendous amount on that level, and we'll talk about that. And in the beginning, as I said, the very beginning of it, the first page is this story. This is the story that he tells about the man coming in the middle of the night while he's sleeping. I started writing this, it just happened to be the 5th of March in the year 2014, is exactly the same day that he set out on his journey, 968 years earlier. I didn't know that at the time, but as I was doing my research on this, I found out that he started on the 5th of March, and that's when I started writing this bayan, this paper. And I hope that this coincidence, if you want to think of it as such, turns out to be propitious in telling the tale and in making known the life of Naaser Khusro, and I hope to be able to explain why I think it's important for Muslims to know about Nāṣir Khusro. This series on strangers are about people that we think sometimes, like in the case of Al-Khidr alayhi salam, you think you know about him, but there's many things you don't know about him. About Salman al-Farsi, people know his name, they know that he came from Persia, they know that he became a Muslim, they know that he saw the Prophet ﷺ for the first time. They don't know that he was brought up to be a Zoroastrian priest and actually acted as a Zoroastrian priest for a number of years, that then he became a Christian and he studied with 4 different bishops and till he reached the end of anybody who knew anything, and they were the ones who told him to go to Medina because there was a prophet coming, alayhi salatu salam, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi salatu salam. But people don't know that. They just know the name. And the name of Nāṣir Khusro is even further unknown. Or if it's known with approbation, and we'll speak about that as well. So why am I writing about him, aside from, this thing of trying to make these little known characters a little bit more known to a larger segment of the Muslim community? In the West, he's known mainly to academics, to Persian scholars, and a few people out of the school of Henri Corbin and Sayyid Hussein Nasr and Allama Tabatabai, may Allah be pleased with him, who are drawn to Gnosticism and mysticism. But very few people, given how many people there are in the Muslim community and in the larger academic community. Though he continues to be very well known in Iran, where his book is widely taught from high school on. It's still readable, still understandable. But I'm one of those smattering of people, if you like, in the West, who is drawn to mysticism and Gnosticism. Beyond that, I've read widely all of my life, and over the last few years, in the 7th decade of my life, I have been drawn as a Muslim to try to understand 2 hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, which read as follows. First one is related by Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who said, "Whoever dies without being bound by the oath of allegiance, the bay'ah, dies the death of the time of ignorance." This is the 1851st hadith in Sahih Muslim. And in another form that's related by Sahih Bukhari and Ahmed bin Hanbal in his Musnad, whoever dies without recognizing the Imam of his time dies the death of ignorance, Jahiliyyah. And the Prophet ﷺ asks, what do you mean by Jahiliyyah? He says, Nar, the fire. So, in my own thinking, as far as the first hadith goes, I have always, or at least since I've been about 30 years old when I became a Muslim, felt safe. For I gave my bay'ah for the first time mistakenly before I was 30, and I've given it 3 or 4 times since due to the deaths of my different shayukh, may Allah have mercy on all of them, over time. And the original time was when a person who advertised himself as being a sheikh turned out to be something else. Not that he was a bad man, but it wasn't what he said he was. So then I was 28 years old at that point, but that changed. So for some 45 years, I felt relatively safe on the first count. That count which says, whoever dies without being bound by the oath of allegiance, whoever dies without making bay'ah in their life, dies the death of ignorance. You have not made, if you've not found somebody to give your bay'ah to you, to him, to her, as the case may be, you're ignorant. And you will die ignorant. And then it's further ramified, and I felt safe, as I say, in this account. But that's further ramified by the understanding of the next hadith in Bukhari and al-Hanbal, which is whoever dies without recognizing the Imam of his time dies the death of ignorance. So far as the first one goes, for 45 years, I felt safe about that. I was not really concerned about the other part because I was with my sheikh, and that changed over the time as they died one after the other. And that sufficed me, and I only began on the death of my last sheikh, Sayyid Ibrahim Muhammad al-Batawi, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, to really question if I knew the Imam, did I know the Imam of my time? And when I really thought about this, I realized that I did not know the Imam of my time. And this led to a very major change in my life. I'm not the same person I was before my sheikh died, Allah yarhamhu, and this became such a pressing question for me. As some of you who are hearing my words or reading this bayan know, I received the khilafah from my sheikh, Dr. Ibrahim Muhammad al-Batawi, who was a professor for some 25 years at Azhar University and dealt with mainly foreign or ajnabi students. And he was a Shazali sheikh who was a student and one of the khulafa of Sheikh Sidi Salam Aradi, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu. And I also received an ijazah in Muraqabah from Dr. Sayyid Ali Ashraf, the Naqshbandi, may Allah have mercy upon him, as well as an ijazah in dawah, in calling to Allah, from Sheikh Umar Abdullah, Allah have mercy upon him, a Ba'alawi from the Comoro Islands, and further a khilafah from Sheikh Kutubuddin Yar Faridi, a Nizamiya Chishtiya Sheikh. So, as I said, I felt pretty safe. And my main concern was to find and grow one of my students from amongst my many students over the years who would take my place when I died, so that our particular line, Badawi Shadliya, would continue. One day, in the midst of my reflections, I realized, as I say, that I truly did not know, as I have said, the Imam of my time. And from that moment on, my life drastically exchanged, to the extent that all of these ijazas and khulafa and all of these things, they faded to insignificance on a certain level. I began to neglect my students, as many of my students know, and why there's so few people actually sitting here. But I neglected my students because I realized I could not really serve them in full. And I urgently began to seek the Imam of my time. In this respect, I must confess to you that I have not been fully successful, though by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have by now managed, I believe, but you can be fooled so easily, to catch sight of him on more than one occasion, as well as I believe, though, as I say, you can be fooled, and I've been fooled before. I followed a voice for many years, and everything went swimmingly, everything went very well, but it nearly destroyed me. Because even though it seemed real, or maybe it was real, I don't know, but I wound up in a lot of difficulties. And it was my sheikh who destroyed that voice for me. Alhamdulillah is one of his great blessings. But I was actually sitting, I would go to maqamat and sit there and listen and hear, say, do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. And everything I did worked out very well. But what it produced, in this case Dar al-Islam in Abiquiu, New Mexico, is very doubtful as in terms of its ultimate, but we don't know, the jury is still out. But as for me, it was not a good experience at all. So I tell you that I've been fooled before, so I could be being fooled again. But I believe that I have caught sight of the Imam, alayhi salam, and I heard him speak, and I believe to the degree that it's possible, I have understood some of his words, and I have endeavored to act upon those words as best I can. All of these, I realize, are preliminary steps, and until I can actually speak with the Imam, alayhi salam, consciously give him my bay'ah, I don't think I will have been successful in my life. And now I'm 75 years old, and I'm not sure that I will have enough time, and I only pray to Allah that He, through His infinite grace, subhanahu wa ta'ala, will make it possible, and I will be able to both see, hear, speak to, and know the Imam of this time. When I say that this has brought about a massive, at least for me and some who are close to me, change in my life, I will try as succinctly as possible to say what I mean by this and exactly how this is involved with this subject of this bayan on Nāṣir al-Khusro, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu. Now, my primary order, the Shāذliye Sufi order, is, as is well known, a Sunni order, whose teachings, albeit originate with Sayyidina Ali, alayhi salam, as do in truth the vast majority of all Sufi orders, with the exception of the Naqshbandi, who take Abu Bakr, radiallahu ta'ala anhu's teaching as their origin, and to the Owaisi, who take their beginning from Owais, and to a certain degree the Tijaniya, which is somewhat obscure beginnings as an Islam for the poor, you might call it, or others have called it, which reacted against the conservative, hierarchical Qadriya brotherhood, which was then dominant in much of the Muslim world, and focused on social reform and grassroots Islamic revival, and whose founder, Maulana Sidi Ahmed Tijani, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, announced that the Prophet ﷺ had directly authorized him in a daylight vision, which is called Yaqadatan, vision while awake, to establish his own order, which is called the Tariqa Ahmadiyya, Muhammadiyya, Ibrahimiyya, Hanafiya, Tijaniya. Now, such happenings are not unheard of. There's been a sheikh in the recent century who claimed that he got a ijaza in this way. But there's always some kind of degree of skepticism surrounding such self-proclamation, in which authority derives from the self of the sheikh rather than from a recognized source, such as Sayyidina Ali alayhi salam or Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an. Indeed, Maulana Sidi Ahmed Tijani, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, told his students that the Prophet ﷺ told him to take Sufism directly from him, hence the name of the order Tijaniya, and not use any of the chains of authority of teacher to disciple that were the mainstay of all the Sufi orders, saying to him, quote, this is a quote that the Prophet said ﷺ to Ahmed Tijani, according to him, you owe no favor to any of the sheikhs of the path. For I, myself, the Prophet ﷺ, I am your medium and I am the provider in every truth. Abandon all that you have taken from any other tariqah and hold fast to this tariqah without seclusion or retirement from people, yani khalwa or ujla, until you reach the promised maqam, and you are as you are without hardship, difficulty or strife, and abdicate from all of the awliya of Allah, have nothing to do with them. This way of the Tijaniya was widely accepted, especially in West Africa, almost immediately after its birth, and Sheikh Tijani became of such high respect that great masses of people visited him to take his wird and his dhikr and be affiliated with him through the bay'ah. But still, among many Sufi people, they question the Tijaniya on the basis of where is his ultimate authority? Is he the ultimate authority? Well, who is he? So this is a question. But I go through that just to explain like how that could be. Now, for myself, as I said, in any case, I am a Shazali Sheikh. With a Maliki, because my Sheikh was a Maliki, his family are Malikis, and Shafi, because he taught at Azhar, and Azhar is a mainly Shafi institution nowadays, background. And my own focus was on Sidna Ali, alayhi salam, as the primary promulgator of the comprehensive teachings of the Prophet, by which I mean the spiritual teachings as well as the worldly teachings. Very important emphasis on the spiritual teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as upon the eponymous founder of the order, Sheikh Abu Hassan al-Shadhili, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, and my own direct teacher and the source for my own authority, Sheikh Ibrahim Muhammad al-Batawi, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu. All that changed. All of that changed when my Sheikh died a few years back. Allah have mercy on him. When I was in my late 60s, and I was confronted at that late part of my life, once again, with the problem of having no living Sheikh. Even though I was functioning under his direct orders, and I pray for him every night, and I feel that he speaks to me, and he guides me, and he's still with me. I don't have any doubt about that. But again, you can fool yourself, because you're not having an exact talk with the person. As you call him up on the phone, I go to see him in Egypt, he comes to America, that's a different situation. So I don't have that relationship, and I'm very conscious of not having that relationship. And when I considered the ramifications of that situation, I was hit head on with the full consequences of the meaning, whoever dies without recognizing the Imam of his time dies the death of ignorance. Because I had all of the bayat, I had done all of that, but I certainly didn't know who that was. Because the Sheikh, may Allah have mercy upon him, and Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, had never specifically told me who was the Imam, alayhi salam, where he was, how I could find him, or what was I supposed to do. Especially now, I can no longer directly ask him about this matter of my great concern, because maybe 10 years earlier, I might have asked him that question, and he might have answered it very simply in a way that would put my heart at rest. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah. Around the same time that this happened with his death and so forth, and reading this poem, I was intimately engaged in working with a group called the North American Islamic Foundation, known as NIFE. And I gave khutbahs in their masajid, and I helped organize events with them, such as the annual Mawlid, because I'm very attached to the Mawlid and dedicated to the Mawlid, and also for Yom al-Ashura and Karbala and so forth. In the course of helping in organizing these events, I was usually asked to give, along with other speakers, a bayan at such event, like I'm doing today. One year, I was asked by the organizers to speak on the post-Karbala message of Sayyida Zainab, alayha salam, in the context of Ali Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Well, central to this bayan was a discussion of the talk that she gave, alayha salam, in Damascus condemning Yazid, specifically focusing on his treatment of Imam al-Hussein, alayhi salam, and the household of the Prophet, Ahlul Bayt, the Quran. Unfortunately, even though what I said was truthful, I quoted her exact words. I read her exact words. It certainly did not go over well with some of the members of this North American Islamic Federation or Foundation, and as well as with some of the people who were in attendance from Ali Sunnah wal Jama'at, who felt that I was respectful, that I should have said radiyallahu ta'ala anhu after mentioning Yazid or his father Muawiyah. but I did not feel inclined to do that at all, on the contrary, then and now. The upshot of that was they dropped me unceremoniously from all their functions and never told me even directly why they had done it, but I have gathered through friends who have spoken with me that it was due to my rather trenchant views on Muawiyah and Yazid, who they regarded, at least to some degree, or some of them, as being loyal ashab, loyal companions of the Prophet ﷺ. My own response to this was hurt and anger, as I put a lot of effort over a 5-year period in helping build up a community outreach program for Knife. But as many things turn out, it was, alhamdulillah, a blessing. A blessing that marked, as it were, another thing, an end to what had been a long period of my life and the beginning of another. And what do I mean by this? Many years ago, when I was a relatively new, naive, and yes, even fairly ignorant Muslim studying in Egypt after 3 years of intense Arabic and Shariat studies in Mecca, I first came across in a meaningful way, rather than a casual one, a meaningful way, with the hadith of the event of the cloak, also known as the hadith of Mubahala. This hadith of the cloak, al-hadith al-kisa', refers to an account of an incident when the Prophet ﷺ gathered Hassan, Hussein, Ali, and Fatima underneath his cloak. And it is mentioned in several hadiths, including Sahih Muslim. I think there's over 40 hadith about it, where the Prophet ﷺ is quoted, but in this particular one in Sahih Muslim, this is one that is attributed to Aisha, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, who said that the Prophet ﷺ went out one morning wearing a striped cloak of black camel's hair, and there came along Hassan bin Ali, alayhi salam, and he, ﷺ, wrapped him under it. And then came Hussein, alayhi salam, and he wrapped him under it, along with his brother. And then came Fatima, alayhi salam, and he took her under it. And then came Ali, alayhi salam, and he took him under it, and said, Allah only desires to take away any uncleanliness from you, O people of the household, and purify you thoroughly, which is an ayat from Quran 33:33, and you'll find this hadith in Sahih Muslim. Anyway, we've all read that hadith. We said suddenly, I thought, whoa, like, what is this? What is really going on here with this? And I somehow, when I was really ready and able to read this hadith with its true meaning, I remember being struck, like somebody hit me almost over the head, or like water went over me, with a great love of the Ahl Bayt. And immediately I also recalled that all of my teachers in authentic Sufism, aside from the first man who was not really authentic in teaching Sufism, who was teaching a kind of New Age type of teaching, had been members of that family. All of my teachers have been from the Ahl Bayt. And that somehow, because of this, I must be connected with the Ahl Bayt myself at the deepest level, which is the level of the bay'ah. Because all these people whom I had bay'ah with were from that family. And this had been percolating for years through all of my studies and my writing and my work, but now the time of the percolation, so as to speak, was over. And a new era had begun, though I could only feel it in a somehow inchoate way. I couldn't really put it together. There was pieces here and pieces there, and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I was a bit misty and not quite clear. What was clear was, in spite of all of that, that this was my way. And immediately I felt a great sense of freedom and love at the same time. Now I hope I'm not taxing any of you with these details about myself when I'm meant to be talking about Naaser al-Khusro, but you'll, I think, understand what I'm talking about as I go deeper into this. So if you go a few years forward, I found myself, 1, the loss of the Sheikh, knowing I do not know who is the Imam, my connection and love with the attachment to Ahl Bayt, and I find myself in the midst of my readings, because I read widely, and my studies, coming across a poem by somebody who's reputed to be, and I read many, many, many books, and so I try to read very widely and understand, a great Persian mystic. That's all I know about him, who was a poet, a traveler, and a philosopher, whose name is Naaser al-Khusru, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu. And in his poem, this poem that I happen to be reading, which Sayyid read from, the confessional ode, or the Qasida Itrafi, he is saying, and this is the translation that I've made with the help of some of my Persian friends, and it's bound in the printed copy of the talk. Unfortunately, those who are listening won't have the benefit of that, but go to the website and you get a copy of it. It's very inexpensive. He says, this is a quote from the poem. And this is a man who's, you know, as I say, you know, he's a, he knows all of the Quran by heart. He's read the Old Testament, the New Testament. He's read all the Greek scholars. He's a really widely read man, really attuned to wisdom. And he says, from every school that I searched, whether it was the Shafi or the Maliki or the Hanafi or the Hanbali, I sought a sign of guidance of the chosen one of Allah, the Almighty, the guide. And each one that I read pointed me in a different way. One to China, one to Africa. Here he's being, you know, saying, went this way and that way. When I asked for a reason or from corroboration from the Quran itself, these people, these teachers, these ulama, recoiled in helplessness, like blind men, like deaf men. And then one day I was reading in the book, meaning the Quran, the ayat concerning the oath, Inna alladhina yubayyunaka innama yubayyuna Allah yadallahi fawqa aydihim, in which Allah proclaims that His hand is above all hands. And I pondered about that group who had sworn allegiance to Him in the beginning beneath the tree, like Jafar and Miqdad and Salman and Bara. And I asked myself, where is that tree and where is that hand? When shall I see that hand? When shall I see those people? When can I make that oath? This is all in his poem. I asked, but I was rebuffed. I was told they are no more. The tree, the hand are gone. The assembly is dispersed. The hand is concealed and veiled in secrecy. Those men that you mentioned were the companions, favored by that allegiance and chosen to be with the Prophet ﷺ in the Jannah, in the garden. I felt so sad when I read this. I remember reading over and over again, they are no more. So I was told. The tree, the hand, they're all gone. The assembly is dispersed. The hand is concealed and veiled in secrecy. Of course, I knew that what he was writing was only partially true, for I had found both the hand and the tree in my life, but even after having found them, still everything was gone. My life was reaching an end, and as yet I did not know the Imam of my time. And to understand what this means, you have to understand the meaning of authority. Yes, there are many thousands of shayukh all over the world. Some of them are ulama as well, and fuqaha, awliya, arifin. But ask yourself, who of these people really know the Imam of our time? A friend of mine and a student recently told me he was going to attend a conference at which many of the eminent shayukh of the time were to be present, including some of those that I usually call the rock and roll shayukh, by whom I mean those who fly first class, sleep in 5-star hotels, even if one of them wears a shiny suit with a scruffy kufi, charge $5,000 for the blessing of their exalted presence, always manage to have 2 or 3 security men around them, and they can even get you into the masjid of the Prophet when the doors are closed after Salat al-Isha. These are the rock and roll shayukh. So I asked my friend politely, to go around and to speak to these guys, these eminent Illuminati, and ask them, did they know who is the Imam of the age? And if they don't know, then he should know that they are as ignorant as he is and I am. Despite having flown first class and despite sleeping in the 5 stars, they have no real authority. None of these people, unless you know who is the Imam, you have no authority. No authority, no real authority. You have authority, but no real authority. Real authority remains with the person being asked a question politely and directly and with no witnesses about, saying, yes, I know, and pointing with direct knowledge at who the Imam is. I met one man once, a very, very saintly man who had been through a lot of things, whose name I won't mention right now. And I asked him, because we were talking about this subject, did you ever see Al-Mahdi, alayhi salam? And his face turned red. He's brownish. His face turned red. And bubbles of sweat popped out of his forehead. He looked exactly like you find described in the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ used to get the wahi. He began to tremble and to shake. And he couldn't get the words out of his mouth until finally he told me, yes. And this is the only person in all the people that I've met in 40 some odd years in being involved in this who said yes, and I believe him, that he had seen Al-Mahdi, alayhi salam. Not in a dream, not in a vision, but he had actually seen him. And that's only one person. And again, it was just like I said, it was private, it was in quiet, there was nobody else around, there was nobody else, he wasn't showing off for anybody or anything like that. This was what they call man to man, you know, a question, an answer. Did you? Yes, I did. Beyond that, I didn't go into it with him. I thought that he would have apoplexy, as a matter of fact. I mean, he was shaking all over, his face was sweating like that, he was bright red. I mean, he was obviously, you know, very, very, very deeply affected by that. And this is a man who was a general in the army prior to his being a great Sufi and fought in battles against the Zionists in the front line. Was, I mean, a very truthful, honest, and sincere man. And this is what he told me. But as to the point above, these people who don't know, and they have no authority. They have no real, they have limited authority, let's say, but they have no real authority. Because real authority remains only with the person who, having been asked a question politely and directly, with no witnesses around, nobody to show off for, really knows by direct knowledge who is the Imam of this time. Real authority has nothing to do with blood. It has nothing to do with lineage or tribe or madhab or tariqah, any of that stuff. Nothing. It has to do with knowing or not knowing, period. And this, at least, I imagine what or who Nāṣir Khusro, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, was in search of when he took the road exactly 960 years ago today, the day that I was writing this. His journey was certainly not first class and not 5-star. He says, quote, "Many a night I made a stone for my pillow, and the clouds were my tent, and I sank as low as a fish, and I ascended sometimes as high as the stars above the hills. Now in the land where water was frozen like marble, now in the land where the very dust was hot as sparks, and I roamed, now on the sea, now on the plateau, trackless wastes, across mountains, sand, streams, up and down precipices, a coil of rope around my shoulder like a camel driver, a pack on my back like a mule, inquiring everywhere I went, searching from city to city and shore to shore. And this is what I'm trying to tell everybody. This is what you have to do if you want to know the truth. This is what you have to do. You cannot go sitting in your house and reading books and doing this, watching things on YouTube and so on and so forth. This is not, you may find out this, that, and the other thing, but this is not what's going to do it. You've got to go and find, just like our earlier ancestors, the Salaf, went and they would go 1,000 miles on foot to find the hadith. Now we have all the hadith. Now what we need now in this time, where is this man who knows? Where is this man of knowledge? And reputedly, there are 313 of them who actually know. So we know that they know, and we know that they're here. We even have a number. In other cases I've seen, so they mentioned 4,000, but in the other case they mentioned 313, which is the same number as the people who were at the Battle of Badr. But anyway, there are people here who know. There are people in this world who know who is the Imam of the time. They not only know, they speak to them, they speak to him, they have bay'at with him. They're here. But you got to find them. And you're not going to find them sitting in your house on your duff. You got to go out, like as he says, many a night I made a stone from my pillow and the clouds from my tent. And the story of this journey that he took is recorded in the Safarnama, or travelogue. And again, these are notes that he took, and he only wrote them all down after he had finished the end of his life. And he wrote about this journey that he took. It's not my intention to speak a long time about the Safarnama. I mean, this is a travelogue. There are many books, a number of books at least, on the subject. And indeed, you can download it, albeit in Urdu, but some parts of it also in Scribe D and from the net. In it, briefly, he recalls visits to dozens of cities over a 7-year period, from March 6, 1046, to October 23rd of 1052. You see, it's very well known exactly when this all happened. And he writes comprehensively about the cities, including the holy cities of Islam, which he includes details about schools, caravanserai, fortifications. He always wrote about fortifications, masajid, water supplies. He was very keen about writing about water supplies, scientists in those cities, the kings of the areas that he visited, the public, the population, the area of the cities, and of course his own interesting memories about what happened when he went there. And as I said before, amazingly, after 1,000 years, this book is still popular, readable for Persian speakers, and taught in schools all over modern Iran. He also wrote a book on mathematics, which has disappeared, as well as Zad al-Musafirin, or the traveling provisions of pilgrims, and Wajidin, or the face of religion, which are theoretical descriptions of religious and philosophical principles, and Gushayish Rahayish, which is a philosophical work that is translated into English by F.M. Hunzai under the title Knowledge and Liberation. You can read it and see what he thinks, which discusses creation, questions related to the soul, epistemology, and the doctrines of the Fatimiyun, which he became. He left as a Sunni, by the way. When he left on his trip, he was a Sunni. And after he studied with Muayyad, he became a Fatimi. It wasn't his original, what he came from. Also, there's available reconciliation of the two wisdoms, Jamia al-Hikmatain, as well on a somewhat lower key, his Book of Enlightenment, which is known as Shish al-Fasl, and the Book of Felicity, and many different smaller books. Some there's questions about, but there's many things you can find that he talks about. The philosophical brotherhood of the Basra, the Ikhwan al-Safa, for instance, and many Shia and pre-Alamuti Ismaili ideas, which were new to him, because that's not where he was coming from. He was coming from a Sunni background. He, in the second, or the ethical section of his poem, he talks about moral maxims, thoughts on man's good and bad qualities, on the necessity of shunning the company of fools and double-faced friends, the deceptive allurements of the world, and the secret snares of ambitious men who crave rank and wealth. He writes about everything, really, in the world. It's a big book. And it concludes with an imaginary vision of a beautiful work of spirits who have stripped off the fetters of earthly cares and sorrows and revel in the pure light of divine wisdom and love, which of course is, which I'll speak about later, the object of the Fatimid thought. But in general, I won't be referring, except in passing, to any of these works, but pay more attention to another work of his, which is the Diwan, which is composed in his latter days and contains most of his lyrical poetry. And the chief topics of these are the enthusiastic praise of Ali alayhi salam and the descendants alayhum salam of Ali alayhi salam, and in particular the 8th Fatimi Imam Mustansir Billah alayhi salam, who he actually met in Cairo. And mind you, the Ismailis are not like the Ithnashri. Ithnashri, the whole thing comes to a relative end with the 12th Imam, who's in seclusion. So they don't have an Imam. They don't have anybody to go. They're in the same place actually as the Sunnis are, except later on, in a certain way. But these people have an Imam. In other words, the people who followed from Jafar Sadiq and Ismail and Muhammad have still a living Imam. Not maybe still after the post-Alamuti period, not so clear, but in that time, in the time of the Fatimids, they definitely had an Imam who they could talk to. And I'll go into some of that in this talk as well. And their ideal was to restore people to their original nature. As I said before, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Allah says, I created the human in the best of forms. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then he descended into the worst of forms. But he was once in the best of forms. So the object of all of the work of the Fatimiyun was to restore people to their original form. This is when we say the Eid al-Fitra, we're talking about Fitra, yani the real being as the human being is created. Everybody created in the form of the Fitra. That was their object, to return people to their original nature, whatever they were. They didn't care what you were, they didn't care who you were, anything about that. What they were interested in is, how can we return you to who you were when you were born? And this man, that Imam Mustansir Billah, he was the Imam for 60 years, and so he had a long time to work on this project. Indeed, that is the longest of all the Khulafa in the Muslim world, either in Egypt or elsewhere in any of the other Islamic states. And his Bab, or his gate, as Ali was the Bab of Muhammad ﷺ, was Muayyad Fidin al-Shirazi, who was the teacher of Nāṣir al-Khusraw. And this man was called the Da'iyat Mutlaq, or the unrestricted caller, or Bab al-Abwab, the gate of gates, or Da'i Duwat, the chief caller, etc. That's who he was. That's the teacher. That's the man who brought him to the Fatimi way of thinking, was this man, Muayyad Fidin al-Shirazi, Qaddasallahu Sirahu. In his theological and in his philosophical writings, he brought the spiritual heritage of the Fatimid to its pinnacle. And in this position, he worked inside the house of knowledge, Dar al-Ilm or Dar al-Hikmah, teaching the dua, the missionaries, the da'is, from both inside and outside the Fatimid lands, and we'll talk more about that because there were 12 of these lands, composing the theological works until the end of his life in 1078. And this diwan, which is a compilation in poetic form of many of these ideas, contains passionate outcries against the duplicities and deceptions of Khorasan, which is his homeland, and its rulers, who wound up, when he came back to his home, driving him from his home, and sometimes his deep despondency in seeing himself despised by his former associates, excluded, ostracized, anathematized as a dog, as an exile, and forbidden from all participation in the interplay of scholars and teachers in the Sunni world that existed in the state of Khorasan. They didn't want to hear from him. No, they didn't want to hear from him, they wanted to get rid of him. They did get rid of him. They drove him and drove him and drove him until they drove him out into this, like they did with the Prophet ﷺ, into this little valley called Badakhshan, a very, very remote part of the world, because they didn't want to hear it, what he had to say. Scattered through all of these outbursts of hope and despair, there are lessons of morality, warnings against the tricks and the perfidies of the world, against the vanity of earthly splendors and greatness, against the folly and injustice of men, against hypocrisy, frivolity, viciousness, the viciousness especially of fashionable society, and that of government courts in particular. The Diwan includes many lyrical and beautiful passages as well, which explores his love of the quiet solitude of his final place of exile and his place of burial in Yamgan, in Badakhshan, where he taught under the protection of the ruler of that province in the very last years of his life, and brought many people to an understanding of the teachings of the Fatimids, and as were conveyed to him by his teacher, Muayyad Fiddin Ashirazi. I first came into contact with this Diwan in an edition of the Imperial Iranian Academy of Philosophy, translated by Ghulam Reza Avani and Peter Lamborn Wilson, who you may know as Hakim Bey, when the latter was a student of Sayyid Hussein Nasr's in the late 60s and early 70s of the last century. And this marked the first time I read, and it was in a truncated and highly edited version of the Qasida Itrafi of Nasr al-Khusro. At the time, when I read it, I must confess that it went in one eye and out the other. But one phrase really deeply registered, I remember till today, when he was speaking about a sheikh, he wrote, I stood before you, quote, I stood before you, pale and skeletal, clad in a woolen cloak, and I kissed your hand. I kissed your hand as if it were the grave of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the black stone of the Kaaba. Now, mind you, at this time I was studying at the Markaz al-Logat al-Arabiya in Mecca, which is perforce a very Saudi institution, and for some reason the library had ordered a copy of this book, and myself, starved for anything remotely Sufic, I borrowed the book from the library, and I admit I was shocked by what this guy Nasr Khusro, Qaddasallahu Siru, had written, kissing the hand of the sheikh as though it were the grave of the Prophet, or the black stone of the Kaaba. I was living in Mecca, and I saw every day people kissing the black stone, and I couldn't imagine that anybody would kiss somebody else's hand as though it were that. In any case, this was my first introduction to his Diwan. And among the things I remember that stuck with me from this was an introduction by Peter Lamborn Wilson when he wrote, quote, most probably all of the Diwan was written after Nasr Khusro's wanderings had ceased, after his search for wisdom among all the sects had culminated in his meeting in Cairo with the Fatimi Imam, and after his mission to Khorasan had ended in exile in Yamgan. It's the poetry of an old man, only in his best moods, reconciled to the life of an exile or hermit. A man who has precisely failed, at least outwardly, to mold the world closer to his heart's desire. When he cautions the Fatimid missionaries, the Dua, warning them that the society at large will reward their preaching only with violence, He obviously speaks from direct experience. The golden court of the Fatimid Khalif at that point in Yamgan was like a dream in his bleak valley, not to be found anymore in the world, which actively persecuted him and rejected his teachings and his ultimate mission. Now, myself, I'm in my mid-70s. I realize the portents of that passage and why it stuck with me even then, having been faced in my own life for my words by a man, takfiri man with a rifle, who entered my house intent on killing me and my family. Actually happened. I bless my dear friend and dead friend Yusuf. May Allah be kind and merciful to him for turning the man back and shining him on and getting him out of the house. And I came within inches of being stabbed in the back, actually in the act of leading prayers in the prison where I served as a chaplain. And I had been asked, don't return to so many masajid I can't even begin to tell you, because of what I say in my khutbahs. Does not fit in with the views of the mainly misogynist, literal, legal custodians of the ex post facto prophecy of the 4th Hijri century. That's my experience. In any case, to follow along with our 4th century Hijri traveler who was to become as a result of the infinite grace of Allah and his studies with Muayyad and the Imam, a living, loving, life-giving proponent of direct insight into prophecy, he and his brother left from Balkh for Nishapur on the 5th of March, as I've noted, in the year 1046 of the Common Era, corresponding to the 23rd day of Shaban in the year 437 of the Hijri calendar. 2.5 months, I was wrong, it was not weeks, 2.5 months after his visionary dream of at that time he got rid of everything, right? 2.5 months after that dream about the man who upbraided him for wasting his life and pointed out to him the Qibla, asking how long he's going to concern himself with these earthly blessings for his body instead of looking for the blessings of knowledge for his soul. And he arrived in Nishapur at the time of a lunar eclipse 6 weeks later on Shawwal 11th or the 21st of April. I stop here for a few minutes, take a break if anybody wants to drink a little coffee or tea, welcome for you, and then I'll continue, inshallah. No, I don't. But anybody want to take it's too much talking.
Good talk.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. This is the second part of this talk on Naaser Khusro, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, on the 30th of March at the Islamic Studies Center. So I had arrived, he had arrived finally at Nishapur. This is the beginning of his quest at the time of a lunar eclipse, 6 weeks after having left his home on Shawwal the 11th is when he arrived. And he said that his spiritual quest, quote, at this point, was to find the most perfect being in the world. That's what he was trying to find, the most perfect being in the world. And with that in mind, he set off from Mecca, and he traveled there by way of Shahrul Khan to Merv, and then he went to Nishapur and visited the tomb of the great Wali Bayezid al-Bustami at Qums, and then he went by way of Demran to Samnan, where he met Ustaz Ali Nisai, who was a pupil of Ibn Sina, and a lecturer on arithmetic, geometry, and medicine, which he was very keen on. And he went onwards then through Qazwin, and then he finally reached Tabriz on Safar 20th of 438. And there he made the acquaintance of the poet Qatran, who explained passages and poems of Dakiki and Ma'ujik. And then he went to Van, Akiyat, Betis, Arzan, Meifarakin, Amid, excuse me if I pronounce anything wrong, Aleppo, and Ma'aratun and Numan, where he met the great Arabic philosophical poet Abu Alaf Ma'ari, and whose character and attainment he speaks about in the warmest of terms. Then he went to Hama, he was now in Shem. He went to Hama, Tripoli, Beirut, Sidon, Tyre, Accra, and Haifa. And he spent some time in Asham. He visited the tombs of all of the prophets there and other holy places. He visited Al-Quds, which at that point was part of Asham. And he arrived there at the beginning of Ramadan, and he stayed for 3 months in Quds, in Jerusalem. And then during that time he visited Bethlehem, and El Khalil, where is buried the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, and his family. And then he made his first pilgrimage to Mecca in 1047. And he only stayed there, and this is, you have to understand that he go all this way, and he stayed there for only 4 days. After the Hajj, after the Jabal al-Rahmah, after the days of Arafat, he stayed for the days of Tashriq, for the cutting of the meat. He stayed for 4 days, and he left immediately. You know, he didn't stay, and he had stayed 3 months in Al-Quds. He left immediately, and he went by way of Damascus back to Al-Quds, and he spent another month in Al-Quds, and then he went by land to Masr, or Egypt, and he finally arrived in Cairo on the 7th of Safar in the year 439 or 1047, and that was the end of his beginnings. Before going on from that to that most important meeting which took place when he reached to Cairo, I would say that when you read his Safarnama, one of the things that struck me anyway, are his very detailed observations of civil, architectural, military, waterworks, all of these things. He was a mystic, but he was very interested in all of these things. And yet he was intensely imbued with the gift of observation of his actual physical surroundings through which he moved. And he writes upon them, and as he's writing years later from notes, and he's writing about, for instance, like a spring, which he notes only flows 3 days a year. And he continues on, and he and his brother and servant, one day they're pulled up short, and they stand amazed by a field that is completely covered with narcissi in bloom, so that the entire place the fields, everything looked that they were white because of the flowers. And as Alice C. Hunsberger writes in her very informative book on Naaser Khusro, The Ruby of Badakhshan, here is a bureaucrat, quote, here is our bureaucrat, engineer, philosopher, poet, exile of later times, steeped in wonder by 1,000 tiny flowers. Or when he reached the outskirts of Tripoli, he talks about, quote, lots of sugarcane, many groves of mangoes, oranges, bananas, lemons, and dates, end quote. Then he goes on to talk about the city itself, which he reckons, and he measured this, he used to pace it all out. It was 1,000 cubits square. 1 cubit, by the way, equals 45.72 centimeters. In an area home to some 20,000 people, which is a lot of people in those days, and buildings, some of them were, quote, 4 or 5 stories high, with some as high as 6 stories, end quote, remarking that, quote, every type of food, fruit, and edible I ever saw in Persia was to be found there, but 100 times more plentiful. This is in Palestine. In Beirut, he mentions a stone arch that is so high that a road goes right through it. He wrote, quote, I estimate the arch to be 50 ells high. 1 ell equals a cubit. A cubit is 45.72 centimeters. He says it's 50 ells high, and all sides are slabs of white stone, each of which weighed at least 1,000 maunds. I'm reading this, and what is a maund? M-A-U-N-D. Well, a maund is 82.28 pounds, okay, like a bag of cement about. This edifice was made of bricks up to a height of 20 ells, and on top of them were set up marble cylinders, each which are 8 ells higher, and so thick that 2 men, I guess it was him and his brother, could scarcely reach around it. And all of this is from a man who wrote that very often, quote, very often I have to spend my nights sleeping on hard stones with no roof or cover above my head except clouds. And I carry all my belongings on my back as a beast of burden, by hills, by sandy deserts, across streams, precipices, wandering from town to town. I inquire everywhere I go, wandering in search of truth. I ask the Persians, I ask the Arabs, I ask Hindus, I ask Turks, I ask Jews, I ask the people from Sind, I ask the Romans, I ask everybody I met, the philosopher, the Manichae, the Sabian, the atheist. I asked, I questioned, I pestered them, unquote. Until, as we say, as I said, he arrived at the end of his beginnings. He writes about that in a poem. This is when he reaches to Cairo. He says, then one day I reached those city gates where angels are servants, where planets and stars are slaves, a garden of roses and pines, girded about with walls of emerald and jasper trees, set in a desert of gold embroidered silk, its springs sweet as honey, the river of paradise, a city which only virtue can aspire to reach, a city whose cypresses are like the blades of intellect, a city whose sages wear brocaded robes woven of silk. And here, before these gates, my reason spoke. Here, before these walls, find what you seek, and do not leave without it with these walls. So I approached the guardian of the gate, and I told him of my search. Rejoice, he said. Your mind has produced a jewel. For beneath this land of truth there flows a crystal river of precious pearls and clear, pure water. This is the lofty sphere of exalted stars. Aye, for sure, it is paradise itself. A contemporary Afghan writer describes what happened. His stay in Cairo marks an epoch in his life, for here he became acquainted with the splendor, the justice, and the wide administration of the 8th Fatimid Khalifa and the Imam Abu Tamim Ma'ad al-Mustansir Billah, who was born in Al-Qahira on the 16th of Jumada in 420, and 8 months afterwards was declared to succeed his father, who had died. His name was Ma'ad Abu Tamim, and he was called Mustansir Billah, or the seeker of victory from Allah. He ascended to the Khilafah at the age of 6. And after his death, the succession was heavily disputed. And this dispute resulted in a split into two branches to this day called the Nizaris and the Musta'ali. Nasir al-Khusro, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, in his Safarnama, has described the city of Al-Qahira, the excellent administration of the Fatimid Imam, the Khulafa, the wealth, the contentment, the security of their subjects. His description of Al-Qahira, its masajid, its gardens, its buildings, and suburbs is admirable. And I'm reminded in this that people that I knew when I lived in Egypt and worked and studied in Egypt they told me, these were older men, and they told me that they remembered that in the morning the watering trucks used to come around and spray the streets with rose water. And this was in the 1940s, 1950s. Sprayed the streets with rose water. Qahira was a fantastic, and is to today, they call it Dunya, the mother of Dunya. It's a fantastic city in which you can find so many things. And he describes all of this. And he describes the details of the administration. And he's impressed with the discipline and the maintenance of law and peace and order in the country. Describing the administration in beautiful words, he says, it seems that the Fatimids are the only lawful authorities and the protectors of the garden of Allah. But most importantly, it was that in Al-Qahira, that Nasir al-Khusro, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, was initiated into the esoteric doctrine of the Fatimiyun and received the commission in time to carry on their call. During this period, Muslims were ruled by pre-Alamut Ismaili Imams who were also the Caliphs of the Islamic world, and this was the period in which Al-Azhar, the world's oldest university, was founded. And according to the Encyclopedia of Islam, Nasir Khusro left Persia at a difficult period, when the country was being laid waste by continuous wars between various small princes. And he found the same wretched picture in all of the Muslim countries which he traveled on his journey. Only in Masr, in Egypt, which he provided a pleasing exception where he saw prosperity, rich bazaars, harmony, and tranquility. As the Ismaili dynasty of the Fatimids were ruling in Masr at that time, Nasir concluded that Islam had diverged from the true path, and that only the Fatimiyun could save the true believers, al-Mu'minun, from the inevitable ruin. And I think to myself, you think of the Muslim world today. People killing people, raping people, shooting people, kidnapping people, all of these things. This is what was going on. Same thing. And this was the only place he found within that realm that was different from that. When Nasir Khusro, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, visited Cairo in 439, he went to visit the Imam, al-Mustansir Billah, where he met for his first time his teacher, al-Muwayyid Fiddin, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, who was then one of the 12 hujjat, or the proofs of the Imam. In other words, you may bear the title of the Imam, but unless you produce somebody who knows what you know, who's the proof of your knowledge, you have not really succeeded. That's the hujjat, the proof. In other words, you can say, a man says, well, I have 1,000 students, so what? Who of them know what you know? That's why I say I was trying to grow a student. Grow a student. Who knows this? Who can organize? Who can take care of? Who can make sure the doors stay open? Who will do this? Who will do that? Who can make sure that there's a school for the teaching of the Quran? Who will do all of these things? Who knows these things? Who knows how to deal with these things? Who can deal with this and that and the other thing? That is your hujjah. That's your proof. If you don't grow one of these, your line dies with you. No matter you say so-and-so is my successor or this doesn't make any difference. Your line dies with you. When he met the Khwaja Muayyad, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, he writes, quote, I began to ask him, this is when he just met him, he says, I began to ask him of the things that were first and the things that will be last, of the cause of the order of the world. What is the basis of things as they are? What is the genus and the way in which species are formed? I asked him about the all-powerful. I asked him about predestination and faith, both of which are never inseparable from each other. But how should one be given precedence over the others? I asked him about the mechanism of the palpitation of day and night. What a beautiful expression, the palpitation of day and night. How from these the beggar becomes rich, the darkness becomes lit. I asked him about the prophets and their contradictory messages, of the reason for the prohibition of drinking blood or intoxicating wine. I asked him about the foundations of the Sharia. Why were there 5 prayers? I asked him about the fast that the Prophet ordered to be observed during the 9th month of every year. I asked him why should zakat be different for silver coins and gold coins? Why a 5th on booty? Why a tithe on irrigated land? Why should this be 1/5 and that 1/10? Why a brother takes 1 share and a sister a half? I asked about the cause of the uneven distribution of happiness. Why does it happen that a worshipper is aggrieved when the oppressor is happy? Why one pious man is unhappy and another is happy? Why one unbeliever enjoys his life while a believer is dissatisfied? Why one is born with solid health and good looking and the other one is born blind or weak health? And yet Allah always acts in perfect justice. Then reason cannot be satisfied by what in its imperfection it sees. I say to him, it is day, but you say it is night. I ask him, prove your contentions, and he draws out a dagger. You say that at a certain place there is a sacred stone, and all who perform a pilgrimage to that become free from sin. And I say to you that Azar, the father of the Prophet Ibrahim, preached the religion of idolatry. You preach the worship of a stone. In my eyes, you're the same to me as Azar. Then he changed my night, quote, he changed my night into a shiny day by his arguments, which were like the sun. He showed me both the worlds of my person and made me behold them openly as well as secretly within myself. And then he put his hand upon his heart. 100 blessings be upon that hand and heart. And said, this is what Sayyid read at the beginning. And he said, I offer you the remedy of proof and demonstration. But if you accept, I am going to place a seal upon your lips, which must never be broken. I gave him my consent, and he put the seal. And drop by drop and day by day he fed me the healing potion until my sickness disappeared. My tongue became imbued with eloquent speech. My face, which had been pale as saffron, grew rosy with joy. I, who had been a stone, was now a ruby. I, who had been dust, now I was ambergris. That's a beautiful itter. If that was the end of his beginning, what followed was the beginning of his end. Nasr Khusro, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, spent 3 or 5 years in the service of the Imam. He was appointed to the propagation of the Dawah in Khorasan. He was given the title of Hujjat in Khorasan. He became one of the 12 Hujjat of the office of the Imam. And during the same time, he made Hajj 3 more times, each time returning to study with Muayyad, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, with whom he undertook vast studies into the levels of hikmah, or wisdom. And as it is classically taught, hikmah is of 2 types, that which is related to knowledge and that which is related to action. So that which is related to knowledge is to realize the essence of things, to understand the connection between cause and effect in regards to the creation, in the occurrence of events, of fate and legislation. As for the action-backed hikmah, or action-based hikmah, he put it simply, put things in their proper places. Action-based hikmah that is putting things in their proper places, operates on 3 levels. 1, give everything its right. Do not exceed the limits in this. Do not rush it before. Do not delay it. Put it in its proper time. 2, realize the intention of Allah and His promise. Realize His justice in His decision, as well as His grace in preventing you from something. And from that which defines this level is that which has been said by the people of firmness in the Sunnah. Hikmah consists of the lofty and praiseworthy goals which are necessitated by His creating and commanding, for which He commanded and for which He predestined. 3, reach the highest levels of knowledge when making your deductions and coming to conclusions. And it is the insight, the knowledge of which is to the heart like something which is looked at as to the eyes that are looking at it, that is, in confirming that the organ is functioning properly. And this is the exclusive and highest level that scholars can reach. This is a view, as it were, from the outside. It can actually describe both Sunni and Shi'i general means of the transmission of wisdom teachings. But the Fatimiyun methodology was very different in many ways and was basically organized around the ideas of the various levels of the da'i, or the caller. The organization and the function of the Fatimiyun dawah as a secret is closely guarded. It's hard to find. There are only limited resources available on this subject, and information is very sparse regarding the dawah activities of the dawla in Iraq, in Persia, in Central Asia, in India, where the dua, or the callers, fearful of persecution, and you'll see why, were continually obliged to observe taqiyya and secrecy in their work. All of this explains why the Fatimiyun literature is generally so poor in historiographical details on the activities of these dua, of these callers. Information that in Fatima times was only available maybe in central headquarters, that is, in the person of the Imam himself. Contemporary scholarship and post-Alamut Ismaili studies, which draw on a variety of sources, including histories of Egypt, has somewhat succeeded in putting together a relatively reliable sketch of this Fatima da'wah. And it has much of its basis in the figure of the da'i and the various levels and strictly defined degrees. The da'i, which is the basis of everything, literally means a caller or summoner, which we have mentioned in Sunni Islam. We call it a missionary. We have these people who go around to masjid, to masjid, to masjid. They're calling people to Islam. So this is a da'i. But in the Fatimid thinking, a da'i was not a missionary, as he's generally is considered in the Sunni sense. A da'i is a person who's responsible for the conversion of his student, as he himself had been converted, as well as the mental and spiritual well-being of the student, and more than that, the da'i was a guide and a pointer to the light of the Imam. The teacher-student relationship of the da'i and the student murshid was very much like what would develop in Sufism. The student wanted Allah. The da'i could bring him or her to Allah, but it was through a multi-layered process in which he or she was led to recognize step by step the true nature and light of the Imam, then the Prophet, and finally Allah. The da'i was the path to the face of Allah, the goal of which is the truth. When I write or say the true stature and light, I do so mindful of Ibn Arabi's observation that you see a long line of people, all standing in communal prayer, all of whom are addressing supposedly Allah. But in reality, if you talk to them, the Allah that they're addressing may be as different as the number of people standing in the line. The question is, who is the real Allah? And given that question, who is it who can teach you, or more importantly, show you the real Allah? This is the basis of the whole journey of Nāṣir Khusro, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, and what led him to question al-Mu'ayyid fi Din, Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, who was a da'i of the highest level in the following manner. And I began to ask him, quote, I began to ask him the things that were first, the things that were last, the basis of the cause of the order of the world. How are things the way they are, and so on and so forth. Which indicates the urgency behind the statement, who does not know the Imam of his time dies in Jahili. If you don't know, you don't know. Life is short. It takes place in time. And the time, the Prophet said, is the time it takes to sit underneath a tree, rest your back for a few minutes, and get up and move on. That's the length of a life. That's exactly, when you die, you realize that's how long your life lasted. It seems like things go on, and you do this, and you pick up the kids, and you go here, and you go there. All of this is, if I sit underneath a tree like this, rest myself for a few minutes like that, and then I get up and I go on. That period of rest like this, that was my whole life. That's how much time you got. So before we look at the levels and the degrees of the dua from the top to the bottom, let's look at how they work from the bottom up. At the first place, the dua, the plural of the da'i, was mainly unknown, purposefully so, given the violence and abuse to which they are often subject. He's called the breaker, the muqassir. Accordingly, they observe the well-known basis, those who know don't show, those who know, those who show don't know, those who know don't show, those who show don't know. This is how they work in shorthand. Let's start at a normal, everyday neighborhood masjid. After a while, in attending such a masjid, bismillah, one gets to know the regulars. And from among the regulars, one sees that there's this one or that one. They seem to want to know something more. Of course, the Wahhabi, Salafi, Takfiris, they're also on the job. Mind you, by the way, a footnote. Saudi Arabia has spent over $70 billion since 1979 on overseas work. More than 2/3 of that is in a campaign to spread Wahhabism across the world. This program, including thousands of masjids and madrasas as well as Islamic centers that have served as support networks for Wahhabi ideology, jihadi movements and takfiri movements, funding for the Afghan jihad was part of this wider campaign, and Saudi charities and rich people have funded radical groups and movements as well as educational and social welfare activities across Africa, the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia, Soviet Union, the West, including the United States. So when I say that, you know, these guys are on the job, they're on the job, believe me. They make similar assessments. They come in and say, oh, you got a fan broken, let me fix your fan for you. And, oh, you're this and that and the other thing. And pretty soon they're saying, you know, your clothes, you know, you know, let me get you some sunnah clothes, you know, so you can get sunnah down, brother. You know, and they bring you that, or they bring hijab for the ladies, or maybe it's a complimentary ticket to Mecca to make Umrah, or even Hajj, maybe even a year at a university in the kingdom, etc. This is brainwashing. And such blandishments, they work, because after expending more than $70 billion, they better work. And they've been quite successful in many dimensions, but alhamdulillah, there's still some who see through this, or else have tasted the fruit and found it bitter, and continue to seek to find the truth among other paths. So the da'i is somebody who's trained to observe this. And at some point, he makes contact with this oddball seeker, with whom he begins to enter into a dialogue. And in this process of this dialogue, he manages to slip in a few ideas that most likely would be seen somewhat strange, but are thought-provoking. And this may take place a number of times, to the point where the seeker, he wants to know more. And so you introduce him to the next level of the da'i, who is more knowledgeable, and he has a group, and he's been working in the field for a longer time, and this brother is not only able to answer questions more thoroughly, but he begins to pose a deeper level of questioning, understanding, and insight. This is how it works. This is how it worked then. This is how it works now. Same thing. I don't have time to go more deeply into this, but to say a few things that might shed some light. For instance, what really is the difference between a Deobandi and a Barelwi Muslim? Why can you pray behind some but not others? How come you can marry some but not others? Why are the rules of divorce in Hanafi Islam different than that of Shafi Islam? Why are rulings regarding riba or interest so different in different schools of Islam when Allah is so explicit in the Quran about the question of riba? Saying things like, Allah will deprive usury of all blessings, or you who believe, fear Allah and give up the remains of your demand for usury. Or if you do not take notice of this usury, you will be at war with Allah, and Allah and His Messenger will be at war with you. Or you who believe, do not devour usury doubled and multiplied, and so on and so forth. There's so many things about it, but if you go to the regulars in the masjid, you're going to find that most of them don't even own their own cars. They don't own their own cars. The bank owns their cars. Whether they're company cars or personal cars, they don't own them. Bank owns them, and they pay riba on it. They don't even own their own houses. The bank owns their houses. Sometimes they don't even own their own clothes. And often they have 5 or 6 credit cards, and many of them are maxed out. They're regular in the masjid. I say, in spite of everything Allah said, that doesn't matter. And then you see how they come to the masjid. Now, they're very big on women wearing hijab. Men don't wear hijab. They're supposed to. They're supposed to cover their aura. The thing about covering their aura is just as much as a woman covering her aura. A man who has not covered his aura in prayer, or even outside of prayer, he's like a woman who's walking around without any hijab on. You see these men with these tight pants and these belts drawn here, the big crotch is sitting here like this. They bend over, you see the bottom of their butt, the crack in the whole thing, see all of that, and they pray like that in the masjid. But they insist, sisters, put your hijab on, you know. But they don't wear hijab. Couldn't be bothered wearing hijab. That's only for women, not for men. But this is what you come across. And so some people, they start to talk to them, they start talking about these things. Now these are outer examples that I've been trying to give you. But then there's a more botany outlook to it. And you're familiar, everybody Muslim is familiar with the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path. This is a very simple matter. Adina Sirat al-Mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. And you ask, well, brother, what is the straight path? Well, they say it's a bridge. It's stretched over the fire. That fire is thinner than the hair. That bridge is thinner than the hair. It's sharper than a sword. All the people who live will have to cross over that bridge. And the fortunate ones know it, and they cross over it and reach the garden, but the unfortunate fall off into the fire. There is a path that the people walk upon the surface of the earth. And another is a path which people follow with their souls. And there is another, had there only been the straight path, why would you have had to say, guide me to the straight path? Allah would have commanded, guide us to the straight path, meaning that's another path. That is not straight. Another path crooked, another path evil. That's established a path is not a path for the body, but a path for the soul. And the straightest path is the way of those to whom Allah has extended His favors, the prophets, the Nabiyeen, the Siddiqeen, the truthful, the Shuhada, the witnesses, the Salihin, the righteous. As Allah says, all those who obey Allah and His Messenger are in the company of those upon whom Allah has bestowed His favors. And the Messenger are those who convey the news to the people of the world. And the truthful means those who expound the inner meaning of the Sharia. And the witnesses are the Imams who are the witnesses of Allah to the people, and the righteous are the proofs among the people, because the betterment of people's souls is due to them. But you thought, oh, I know what they are. I know who the Nabiyeen are. They're prophets. I know who the Siddiqeen are. They're the truthful. I know who the Shuhada. But you don't really know. You only know the names of what this word is about. And then he begins to speak about people, this da'i, about people who claim for themselves more than what is theirs, as well as those who claim a lower place for themselves. Well, I don't know anything really. One falls off the left-hand side of the path, the other falls off the right-hand side of the path. One says he does not need to learn, and secretly he really thinks he knows more than anybody else. And whosoever claims that he knows more, but knows less, both have fallen. So these people put these ideas into your mind, these breakers, muqassirs, the lowest of the dais. They're on the lookout in masjids all across, looking out for these people who are asking. It look like they want to know a little bit more. They're tired of potlucks and things like that. They want a little bit more than that. Got to be something more in this than that, you know. So they start asking questions, but the questions have hard answers, not easy answers. Because what you thought was true is not necessarily true. There are people who think, well, I'm a Sunni and he's a Shi'i. I'm good, he's bad. I'm a Shadli, he's a Naqshbandi. I'm a Deobandi, he's a Barelvi. I'm a this, I'm a that, he's a that, he's a this. All of these things, they have all these ideas. All are shaitan. It's all shaitan. Shaitan's sin is what? I'm better than he is. Whatever it is, I'm better than you are. I'm black, you're white. I speak Urdu, you speak Arabic, or vice versa. I speak Arabic, you speak Urdu. Whatever it is, I'm better than you are. That's their sin. And that's what has to be combated. That's what has to come to an end. That's what has to be washed out and washed up, finished, if you're going to get anywhere. If you think that you're something and you have a criteria, what's the criteria? Do you know the Imam of the time? That's the criteria. If you don't, you're nothing, buddy. No matter how many degrees, no matter how cars, no many houses, no many wives, no matter whatever it is that you have, you got nothing. Nothing. In truth. Nothing. And as long as you have those things, well, I got a house, that guy lives in a shack. I'm better than he is, obviously. You know, like the Christians who think, well, if God loves me, I got money. Proof of God's love of me is money. If I got money, God loves me. If I don't have money, I use the word God advisedly. I mean, obviously he doesn't have money. That's why the poor people, they give him such a lousy rap, especially in this country, because God doesn't love them. Because if God loved them, he'd give them money. Because the people who God loves, he gives them money, right? See how it works? That's how the Republican Party and the Tea Party work, just on that basis. And it's all shaitan. So that is the lowest level that it works at. This is the muqassir, the breaker. His job is to change the way you think. His job is to insert into your mind little niggling things that cause you, like, for instance, why is it that, you know, it says, Ati Allah wa ati Rasulu wa ulul amr minkum. Obey Allah, obey His Rasul, and those in power among you, those in authority among you. And so on Eid Day, like 10 years back, and now it'll be 2 years forward, you know, you watch Egyptian TV, and there's Husni Mubarak. And sitting on his right is the Sheikh of Azhar. Sitting on his left is the Mufti of Egypt. They know he's a thief. They know he's a robber. They know he's corrupt. They know all of that about him, but they don't say anything. It's Eid. He's the president. He's Ulul Amr. He's the one who's in authority. And next it'll be Assisi, new one. And it'll be the same thing. The Sheikh of Azhar will be here, and the Mufti will be there. And he may start off clean, but he ain't going to last clean. That's the way it is. But these people put this in your mind, and they say, well, how come is that? How come a man who is regarded as the highest authority in Sunni Islam, the Sheikh of Azhar, how can he sit with a murderer, with a corrupter, with a liar, with a thief? How can people go and do business in the capitals of the world with these killers? Who is Hillary Clinton? That she stands up in front of the people and tells them that the leader of some country of Syria, for instance, has blood on his hands, when she's up to her waist in blood. It's like Putin said. They think they can say whatever they want to say, and because they say it, that's the way it's going to be. That's the way it is. These are the things. This is the hypocrisy of life. And you got to see this. And if it's just business as usual, and as they said, you want to do business with the devil, you want to eat with the devil, you better have a very long spoon. Shakespeare said that. And this is what it is. People are eating with the devil every day. People are doing business with Yazid every day. Filth and filth. This is the story. On the other hand, if you start at the highest levels of the dawah, or the organization of the da'is, you have the absolute or unrestricted caller, who is a person who's in touch with the imam, and is at work directly under his leadership. And these are also called da'i du'at, or caller of the callers. They're ones who are in touch with the imam. And they have hujjah, which I've talked about before. Sometimes they're called bab, because as he said, ana madinat al-ilm wa ali babuha. So you talk about the hujjah is the bab. Who is the bab? The bab is the proof of you. Because if you know something, if you're a sheikh who knows something, you ought to be able to get this person to know what you know, because you're going to die. You're going to die. Sooner or later, you're going to die. And if you haven't transferred that, your knowledge, here and there, to somebody else, who's going to continue? Or will it be like the places in India where it's father and son and grandson and so on and so forth like that, and they don't know nothing about nothing? Except they keep the place going, that's so you can say something for them. So you have to have this man, or a group of them who are that. And then after them you have the da'i al-madud, or the one who is the assistant to this person, like that, again the hujjah. And for the purposes of all of this, because there's somebody who has the whole thing in understanding, the world was divided into 12 parts. They called these parts the Jazeera. Most people ignorantly thought it meant islands, so they spoke about the islands of the earth, al-Jazur min al-Ard. But Ivanhoe says, no, Jazeera does not mean island. It means, and he takes the basic sense of the root, jazara, to cut something off, or slice it, or cut it, or part it, or section it. He means the 12 islands are the 12 sections of the world population, which at that time were Arabs, Turks, Berbers, Negroes, Abyssinians, Khazar, China, Dailam, Rum, and Sakaliba, whatever they are. Each of those is a separate thing, because the psychology of each one of those people is different. You have to have a mukassir, you have to have a breaker in that place who understands. Like when we used to teach, we used to have a school for teaching in the summer, and a lot of Sister Clara Muhammad people used to come, and we would teach, but they say, no, you don't understand, we have a different reality. We're black people in America. We have a different thing going. What you're teaching, you're white people in America. Right? Well, white people in America have a different reality than black people in America. Doesn't mean white people or black people are better than each other or anything else like that. It just means that they look at the world differently. So the person who's going to insert this knowledge into their mind has to be somebody who understands their mentality. So these were called the islands. And each island was under the charge of a high-ranking dua, a high-ranking da'i rather, and each of them has their hujjah, or as they called in early Fatimid times, the yad, their hand. So they called the man the yad. Later time they call him the breaker of patterns and habits and so forth like that. In the beginning they called him the yad, the hand. Huh? So there's a whole thing about that, and this was really, like as I say, that this man, the Muqassir, the breaker, was responsible for attracting prospective converts, and I'm going to call them converts, not reverts, converts, and breaking their attachment to other religions, to other sects, to other schools, to other things, so that the ordinary Fatimid initiates, the ones who understood this, they call them the friends of Allah, the awliya of Allah. And they don't belong to the organization because they're not doing anything really in the organization. They're just simply people who finally understood the truth of the matter. So this whole thing was a very, very, very highly organized situation, well thought out. And the way it started was very simple. We don't care what you are. We don't care what you are. We don't even care if you're a Muslim, because you'll wind up being one if you listen to us. We don't care what you are. And we don't think that what you are, we don't care if you're rich or poor or black or white or red or yellow or from the north or the south or the east or the west or whatever. We don't care anything. Our function is to guide you home, is to bring you back home. If I can't bring you back home, I know my friend here who's been at this longer than I have, who can help you more, and he knows somebody who can help you even more, and so forth and so on like that. And we want to return you to your original self, to the being that Allah created in the beginning. And so, for instance, how does our Juma go? Our Imam is still alive. Imam sends us a message, say, okay, this week talk about brotherhood. Okay, good. Talk about brotherhood. Well, the khutbah lasts about 20 minutes or 30 minutes because everybody's got to go back to work. So you can't say very much about anything in 30 minutes, as this is proof. So, okay. So then the people who are happy with 20 minutes or 30 minutes, they leave. But the people want more than 20 minutes. In those days, there was no QTV or anything like that, no internet or something like that. There was just that person, that caller. So a period after Salatul Jummah that's called ta'aleem, teaching, education. And he spends the time between then and Asr explaining what he said in that 20 minutes or 25 minutes, giving you the depth of the teaching, giving you the depth of the understanding of, for instance, the subject of brotherhood or the subject of usury or the subject, whatever the subject happens to be, good or bad, until you reach Asr. Then you pray Asr, and those people who want to leave, leave, but there's some people still want more. So you take them to this place that's called Dar al-Hikmah, the house of wisdom. Not in the masjid. Dar al-Hikmah. And who speaks in Dar al-Hikmah? The Imam. And he tells you the deep of the deep of the deep of the deep of what it was about, why he gave this original idea for this khutbah in the first place. This is how the teaching worked for the generality of the Muslim community. You take what you want. You want 20 minutes? Fine. We'll give you 20 minutes, 30 minutes. If that's enough for you, kifayat. You want more? Hang around. We'll give you more. You want still more? Hang around a little bit longer, because in those days that was a day off by and large, right? Hang around a little bit longer, and you'll work from Asr till Maghrib, and we'll give you a still deeper teaching. This is how it worked. Then you have all week to try and put it together, to work on it. So this is who these people were. Now, who were they concerned with? They were concerned with what I say, everybody. After you're born, things happen, as Rumsfeld used to say. But in the beginning, everybody is perfect. And if in the beginning everybody is perfect, then surely there must be a way to return people to perfection. And this is the true and the deep reason behind all the teachings of the Fatimids under their imams, who through nas, or the explicit designation, which is a prerogative bestowed by Allah upon a chosen person who before his death, with the guidance of Allah, transfers this imamate to another person who ensures the continuity of the wilayat in another body. And that's what happened to Ali when the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, whose Mawla I am, Ali is his Mawla. Ana madinat al-ilm wa Ali babuha. فَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْعِلْمِ فَلْيَأْتِ الْبَابِ. I am the city of knowledge. Ali is its gate. Whoever desires knowledge, let him go in by the gate. In other words, these people knew what they were talking about. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to go about doing it, which was nothing less than the attempt by spiritual means to return people to their original perfection of asani taqweem. And the whole elaborate system that I've described of these layers of up and down and breakers and these and the people under the imams and everything, all is for that purpose. It's just simply to return people, all and any people, whoever they are may be. Because he doesn't say that he made the only Muslims to be in the asani taqweem. خلقنا الإنسان Insan, al-ma'na al-insan, what does it mean? Everybody, everybody. Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, whatever, Kafirs, whatever you are, you were born perfect. Everybody was born perfect. And we know how to return you to your perfection. This is what the school was. This is what the school is, then and now. What are the reasons for this behavior, which is so obviously, when we look at things, for instance, what we see in the world, not Muslim, and contrary to everything that Allah and His Prophet have made known to us, hatred of other human beings, killing of other people, raping of people, throwing acid at people, all of these things, you know that this has nothing to do. Can you imagine the Prophet ﷺ throwing acid in the face of a girl who wants to go to school? No. Allah says, hold fast, people, to the rope of Allah all together. Do not be disunited. Remember the favor of Allah upon you when you were enemies, and He united your hearts, and He made you brothers. The believers are brothers, so make peace between your brothers. Do not find fault with your people. Do not call each other by bad names. Help one another to good and righteous works. This is all from Quran. Do not help one another in sin and aggression. Do not hate one another. Do not be jealous of one another. Do not boycott one another. Be servants of Allah as brothers. Tell that to the Sunnis and the Shia who are fighting in the streets of Syria. Do not hate one another. Be as brothers. It's not lawful for a Muslim to sever his relationships with his brother for more than 3 days. You will see the believers in their having mercy for one another, love for one another, kindness for one another. It's like the human body. When one limb is sick, the whole body feels it. If your tooth hurts, your whole body hurts. One part calls out to the other. None of you will be a believer until he loves for his brother what he loves from himself, said the Prophet ﷺ according to Al-Bukhari. La yu'min billah hatta yuhib li akihi ma yuhib li nafsi. These are the suggested models of relations which are not being followed by Muslims. And instead we find that it is a good deal of our behavior as Muslims to other Muslims, not to mention to Christians, not to mention to Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, whatever, all derived from that prime sin of shaitan, which is his belief that he is better than Adam. Qala man manaka ala tasjud ila artuka. Qala ana khayrun minhu khalaqatani min narin wa khalaqtu min tin. He said, what prevented you, Iblis, prevented you from prostrating when I commanded you? And he said, I am better than he is. You made me from fire, and you made him from clay. All of these wars in Syria, in Egypt, in Libya, in Mali, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Bahrain, and on and on and on to your local masjid, even into the zawiyas, are based upon the shaitanic belief that I'm better than you are. We are better than you are. We are Sunnis, you are Shia. We are Hanafi, you are Maliki. We are Deobandi, you are Barelwi. We are Naqshbandi, you are Qadri. We are Chisti, you are Shadli. We are Salafi, you are Sufis. We fix the beginning of Ramadan by calculations, but you insist on visually sighting the moon, so on and so on and so on. And as Bob Marley said, and everywhere is war. Everywhere is war. And all because one person or one group think they are better than the other, and they know and the others don't, and it's our way or the highway. But during this Fatimi rule, it didn't matter who you were or what you were. What mattered then and now was how close your belief, your iman, was to your amal, to your behavior. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu wa amilu salihati, which was matched to your original nature of your fitra at the time of your birth. And Allah has promised to those who appoint those who believe and perform good deeds as His representative on the earth. وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَا يَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. If you look up Fatimid dynasty, you look up Fatimid empire, you look up Fatimid caliphate, you look up Fatimid beliefs, you'll find hundreds of views. And most of them, what they say, these people were gulat, these people were kafirs, these people were extremists, these people were exaggerators, these people are dogs, and so forth. According many of the early scholarly interviews that have been made, either taking into account biased sectarian perspectives or considering it as a minor chapter in the history of Islam, have given the difficulties faced by scholars wishing to obtain manuscripts in Sunni countries. Thus, the picture of Shiism, and this specifically this Fatimid Shiism, has emerged as one of political and economic-based movement which has degenerated into a religious millenarian heresy. And in the Middle Ages, there was hardly anything you could find about this. We would have to look to the Crusader writers, people like William of Tyre and Jacques de Vitry, and all of these who were marred by prejudice and distortion for the most part. More even-handed and deeper studies began finally to emerge in the early 20th century from the Russian scholar Ivanov, who, beginning from the 3rd century of the 20th century, devoted his endeavors to the study of these phenomena. And he wrote a great book from his studies, Early Persian Islamism, in 1948. And there was a pupil of Etienne Gilson, Henri Corbin, who was put in touch with Iranian Shiism by Massignon, who was head of the Islamic Study Department at the Corbin, at the Sorbonne, who contributed to the development of this study by outlining the important aspects of the mystically oriented ethos of Shiism at the Sorbonne. Corbin eventually wound up after World War II in Tehran as the director of the French Institute of Iranian Studies and founder of the series Bibliothèque Iranienne. Never abandoned his spiritual and scholarly attachment to Iran and Shiism, devotedly collected, edited, translated some of these works of Shia theology. Otherwise, we won't know anything of their philosophy and their gnosis, of the Irfan. And roughly around the same time, he trained a whole generation of scholars that would eventually vivify international debate on this subject, both in Iran and in Western academia, through his many contributions. His intellectual circle was in turn linked to the broader and prestigious milieu of European scholars, meeting on regular basis at the Irano sessions in Ascona in Switzerland. Among that group were Mircea Eliade, Gustav Jung, Carl Jung, and Gershon Scholem, and the famed Iranian intellectual Sayyid Hussein Naaser, who a prolific traditionalist scholar, still alive and presently based in North America, besides writing a number of popular and best-selling books on Sufism and Shiism and so forth, founded the Imperial Academy of Philosophy in Iran, which after the revolution was renamed the Institute for the Study of Hikmah and Philosophy. Still going. and that eventually became, beside the French Institute of Iranian Studies under Corbin, the second research of attraction for these academics, Iranian and foreigners alike, interested in the study of this subject. Outside of Iran, two major centers were involved in Corbin's effort to do this. The École Pratique d'Études of the Sorbonne, where Corbin used to teach very dense courses. You can see this very dense material related to the pioneering research in Iran. And the second place was McGill's University in Canada of Islamic Shiism, the Institute of Islamic Shiism, who was founded by Dr. Wilfred Canwell Smith. From 1964, Corbin's close associate, Herman Landolt, professor of Islamic thought at the Institute, he continued these. More important public intellectuals and researchers shared a common path with these pupils, and they played a pivotal role in Iranian internal debate even till today, and their names are well known in Iran. More than tangential to the main characters of this environment were the contributions of the revered Imami ulama, most notably the late Allama Tabatabai, most well known for his Tafsir al-Mizan, 28 volumes, only 14 of which are translated. You can find it in the library here in Charlottesville. Why were the others not translated? Because the authorities of the imperial, or the, what do you call it, the Islamic Republic, they're not interested in letting these ideas be known. They're not interested in it. In later years, this man would often hold, Tabatabai would hold study sessions with Henri Corbin, Sayyid Nasser, and others, in which not only the classical texts of divine wisdom and gnosis were discussed, but also a whole cycle of what Nasser himself called comparative gnosis, in which each session the sacred texts of one of the major religions containing mystical and gnostical teachings such as Tao Te Ching and the Upanishads and the Gospels of John were discussed and compared with Sufism and Islamic Gnostic doctrines in general. Where is this today? We don't have $92 billion to spend. We don't have it. We don't have it. The situation, alhamdulillah, changed somewhat for the better at the end of the 1960s, when a major event occurred in marking the passage of the study of this from a small circle to a broader audience of specialists and readers. In the 1968, the Colloque de Strasbourg, a roundtable about it, attended by then leading specialists of Imamism, were present, the old generation of the Islamists who had done research in it, people like Henri Corbin, Vajda, Sayyid Hussein Nasser, Francesco Gabrielli, Wilfred Madelung, and the leading Lebanese Alam Musa Sadr, whose paper unfortunately never reached the editors and is missed from the proceedings. But all of these things became, for people like me, innocent, naive, whatever you want to call me, you know, people who came across these things. Allah bless these people. I trust, as I said earlier, that the listener will don't find what I'm talking about a digression, but understand that if you want to find out about who this Nasser Khusro was, that you have to understand this. Alhamdulillah, that there are places that you can understand it. There's a well-known cliche which is attributed to Winston Churchill that says, history is written by the victors. And this being the case, since the time of Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, better known to the Western world as Salah ad-Din, the first Sultan of Egypt and Syria, founder of the Ayyubid dynasty, who put an end to the Fatimid rule, put an end to this. It's been very difficult to know the reality of this Fatimid thought, the true mission of the Dawah, to convert total darkness at every level into light. In every cycle, a portion of darkness is reconverted into light. And these cycles will continue until all is converted into light. And all matter that exists will be transformed back into the original form, and it's light that will ultimately prevail. And it is this reason why the custodians of the literal, legal, ex post facto prophecy. The legatees of socio-political Islam have done everything that they could do to obscure the name of the Fatimids and reduce them to utter obscurity and cast doubt upon the sincerity and truth of Islam, because they knew and know that it doesn't matter in the end who you are, but what you are. And among these related, it is interesting why Ali and Hussein and so many more who took their path were murdered and martyred. Why? Because of this understanding. In Al-Qahira, the Ayyubids under Salah ad-Din had all the treasures of the Fatimids. This is just like Halugu did in Baghdad, including all the books burned, thrown into the Nile, onto a great heap, the ones that were left, and covered with sand. So there was a regular quote, it was called the Hill of Books, was formed. And it was said that the Mamluk soldiers used to sole their shoes with the bindings of these books. And the number of the books alone said to have been disposed of varied between 120,000 to 2 million. This is what happened. We've never recovered from it. Never recovered from it. That's why Syria exists. That's why Egypt exists. That's why Mali, that all of this exists, because we live in stupidity. We've been reduced to stupidity. This bright thing of Islam has been covered with muck, with the stupidity of these worldly people. The Fatimid Khalifa, the Khilafah founded in the Maghrib in 297, over its lifetime embodied one of the greatest successes of Islam in terms of its actual and real adherence to the true teachings of the Prophet as mercy to all creation, as mercy to all being, and its dedication to the restoration of humanity to the best of forms, to the fitra. It came to an end functionally after 262 years, and the teachings for all intents and purposes have been lost from then until now, except for rare pockets here and there, except it remains as distortions. People don't even understand what it is, half-truths, lies, where a point where there was in this very room a bright young lady came who was studying Islamic history at this major U.S. University of University of Virginia, had little or no idea of who or what the Fatimids were, when in actuality, or what their teachings consisted of. And here's the United States, founded in 1786. It's now 2014, 228 years of existence. Do you think that little or nothing will be known of the United States in 1,000 years? Maybe, maybe not, but most likely not. Yet this is what's happened to the memories of the Fatimid Khalifa in the eyes and the minds and the hearts of most Muslim people. If you talk to them, they think that these people, all the things that I've said about them, from dogs to extremists to this, to that, they are not really there, except for the most part, as distortions and half-truths, and you have to dig and dig and dig and dig to find some truth about them. You know? Oh yes, you can say, I've lived in Cairo. I know there are ruins in Cairo. There are Azhar University. There's the Masjid al-Hussein, alayhi salam. But there's just old buildings and assorted historical rubbish. That's what the people think, with the exception of a few scholars and people, culture mavens and people like that, who are interested in these things. But most of the people, nothing. They don't know how did these, it's people in the street, they don't know where those buildings came from. They don't know what they represent. They don't know anything about them. They don't know what, oh, that's Azhar, or that's Al-Hussein, or that's Sayyida Zainab, or that's Fatima Nabawiya, or this. They don't know what it is. No idea what's behind it, only the outer manifestation of what's left of it. Too spiritual by far. That's the truth of it. And that is not only in the Sunni world, and I wish that Sayyid Dusty was still here, because it's also the world of modern day Iranian Shia. Devoid, they don't have the figure of a legitimate imam. He's lost. He's in seclusion. So what you have in reality is the same political, legal setup that the Sunnis have, which becomes the justification for the institution of the rationalist imitation, the taqlidi yani, of the most learned, and the management of political power by its ultimate theorization, the marja taqlid, the source of the imitation, who function under the supreme leader, the vali faqih, who, in the absence again of an imam, who of course is in occlusion or seclusion for 1,000 years or more, at least according to some, and if the truth were to be known, those people want to keep him in seclusion because they don't want to lose their jobs. And there's another view, of course, that the hidden imam is still on earth among the body of the Shia, among some of the groups, but he's incognito. So what can you do? They have the same problem. They're no different than the Sunnis in that sense. What I say, all of the above is held without any relevance when in truth the teachings, these teachings, if you can understand these teachings, are of the highest relevance, not just in the political, legal realm of modern Islam. I want you to understand why I'm writing this about Nāṣir Khusro. Look up about him. You find all these things. He was this, he was that, poet, philosopher, traveler, blah, 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 all of these things, read, blah, this, that, all of these things, made Hajj and so on and so forth like that. But you won't find in all of that stuff on the net, and believe me, I've looked at all that, they'll never talk to you about what he was thinking. Never. Hardly ever. I talked, he was a great philosopher, he was a poet, he was a mathematician, he was a this, he was that, but they won't talk about this. And according to Dr. Iwano, who cares about this, for him, Nāṣir Khusro was the truth. This is a quote. His truth was only Islam. And it may be easily realized that the truth, and that this philosophy, this stuff and all that stuff, was nothing to him. The thing that was to him was Islam. And it is quite possible that he might have been a Shia because of the changes of things and everything, the upset in his career, the frustration of his youthful ambitions, his probable contacts with Islam. But that's what he wound up being. And after completing his higher studies under the Da'iya Mutlaq al-Mu'ayyid fi Din al-Shirazi and the Imam, he returned to his native land after 7 years and served as a Da'i of the highest rank, a Hujjah, because he had become the Hujjah of his teacher, the proof of it, the proof by the nature of his being, not by his books, not by his philosophy, not by his studies, not by his theoretical knowledge, but by his being. How, one might ask, can one in this time hope to realize this degree of knowledge and understanding? And on a general level, you can read all these books and so on and so forth and talk about all of these things, and he did this and he did that. But the reality is, and how he paid attention to this and he knew about that, but that's all beside the point. Really, it's beside the point. The Ismailis or the Fatimids, like all of the Shia, believe in the hidden meaning of the Quran. Now we come to the nexus, the real thing of it. They believe that the Quran has a hidden meaning, which they refer to as ta'wil. In the tafsir, the literature of Sunni Islam, the word tafsir and ta'wil are used almost synonymously. But in Shia Islam, both have distinct meaning. Tafsir in Shia Islam refers to the zahiri meaning of the Quran. What does it mean? Bismillah al-akhir. The ta'wil refers to the hidden meaning. The Sunnis and the Shia differ on the meaning of the 6th verse of chapter 3, the chapter of Al Imran. According to the Sunni commentaries, this verse means no one knows its interpretation, the Quran, except Allah. And then it stops. And then it says, and meaning in English, because most people here are not speaking Arabic, that these people who are firmly rooted in knowledge say, we believe in it. That over there, we believe in it. It's all from Allah. It's all from our Lord. This, according to Sunni commentaries on the Quran, Allah alone, thus, according to the Sunni commentaries, Allah alone has the knowledge of ta'wil. And the Rasikhuna fi ilmi, or the great ulama and arifin, they don't possess that knowledge. And they believe that it's known only to Allah. But the Shia, these, especially the Fatimis, believe that this knowledge of ta'wil is possessed by the Rasikun fi ilm, and they don't stop there. The ones who believe in this, that only Allah knows this, they believe more, that they believe that the Rasikun fi ilm, these people of knowledge, know it. And these are the teachers, these are the imams, these are the people who come from Fatima and Ali. These are not only Allah that knows, but the Prophet and his inheritor, alayhi salatu salam, and his inheritor, and the imams and the progeny, they possess the knowledge of ta'wil. And that takes us, what is this? It takes us, it's called ilm min laduni, which you find in the Quran, knowledge which passes orally from the Prophet to his wasi, and then from the wasi to the imam, and then from one imam to the other, and to the students who are gathered. But if we go historically, then one finds the exposition of ta'wil literature later and this and that, and it all gets changed again. But the hidden meaning, or the botany meaning of these verses, is attempted by the imams and the callers after the spread of knowledge in the world, and the Greek knowledge in the world. And they were written about in the Rasail at Ikhwan Safa, the brother of purity, are of great importance. These epistles do not attempt exposition of ta'wil systematically, but contain elements of it, and could be taken as the exposition of the discipline of ta'wil. And these Ismaili da'is, Yaqub Sijistani, Jafar Mansur al-Yemen, Qadi al-Numan, Hamidun Kirmani, Muaida Shirazi, and several others played a great role in making this clear. And we're thankful to them. It's no exaggeration to say that this ilm ta'wil is really unique to them. It was a major attempt that was made to synthesize all the knowledge of the time, because the knowledge belongs to everybody. Some people, the Orientalists, say that this is Greek knowledge came into it, and that's where it all comes from. But the people of the Fatimids say, no, this was ilm an-nubuwah. This was the knowledge, prophetic knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ that he transferred to Ali, and it's been passed on from imam to imam. It's an oral knowledge. And we do not find its record, they say, before the epistles of the Ikhwan Safa. But one say that's because the knowledge wasn't written, because they didn't believe in writing it. They only believed in speaking it. And this is what it's based upon. It's based upon this spoken knowledge based upon reason. It means, in Arabic, ta'wil means to go to the first, the primary, the basic meaning of the word and go from there. It's like jazir. Like this, everybody think, oh, it's talking about islands. No, it's talking about, we've divided it up into different sections, because jazara means to cut something up. That's ta'wil. One who recites the kalima, one who performs the outer rituals, the dhahri rituals, prays, fasts, pays zakat, makes hajj, everything, is a Muslim, no doubt. But there's a difference between a Muslim and a mu'min, which is love, first of all. And this is one who not only performs those prescriptions, the mu'min prays, the mu'min fasts, the mu'min makes zakat, the mu'min makes hajj, he does all of those things, but he also believes in the real, original, intended meaning of why he's doing these actions, and he's not praying for Allah, because Allah doesn't need any prayers. He's praying for himself, because he's imperfect, and he needs to be perfected. And the Ismailis, they say to the dwellers of the desert, say, Amana, we believe. Say to them, Ya Muhammad, you don't believe. You submit, aslama, but iman hasn't entered your hearts. This verse makes the distinction between Islam and iman, between those who submit, Muslims, and those who believe, mu'mins. وَلَا يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ حَتَّى يُحِبْ لِأَخِيهِ مَا يُحِبْ لِنَفْسِهِ. According to them, it's not acceptance of what is manifest, zahir, but it is sincere belief in the hidden and the original. And before we go any further, it's necessary to shed some light on what is batin and what is the way it is done. And it is important to note that ordinary people are not supposed to know about this. Ordinary Muslims aren't supposed to know about this. You go talk about this in the masjid, you talk about the batin, they say, oh, blah, blah. Come on, brother, let's forget about that. It's only the chosen few or the initiated. That's why we talk about 85%, 10%, and 5%, or 2% of the 5%, and all of that. How many people know? It's only the chosen few. And yes, you say that's elitism and everything. Yes, it is elitism. It was a strictly guided secret, even kept from ordinary believers, and the reason was obvious. These people were looked upon as heretics by Orthodox Muslims. Ghazali wrote a whole book on them, and they accused them of believing in hulul and tanasuk, that is, incarnationism and transmigration of souls. That is not true. Even Kamal Hussein, who was chairman of the Department of Ismaili Studies at Azhar, refuted those allegations. They believe, as we've sought to make clear, were misunderstood about what they believed. And they have fear of this, and so they hid from the generality of Muslims their beliefs. And they hid all of this away and revealed it only to the chosen or the initiated few through the process that we have described. Step by step, spoonful by spoonful, you put it into the person until they understand, and they ask a question. It's just like you look at that building, the Pentagon, and you see that there's a hole in the wall there, and they tell you an airplane flew through it. And you know, and I know, no airplane ever flew through it, because an airplane has wings, and an airplane has a tail, and the hole is like this, and it has nothing like that, and has nothing like this, and they lied. They lied. They lied. And once you know they lied, nothing is ever the same. You're like Alice in Wonderland. You've gone down the rabbit hole, and things are not what they seem to be. Not at all. That's the world. So what you've been told is like this young woman who comes to me. Who are these people? How? I ask you, how can a young, intelligent woman who's studying Islamic studies at a major university in America not know about who these people are? How can it be? Or what they know, or what she knows is only bad things about them, for the most part. How is that? Because there is a conspiracy, if you want to know the word, to hide that, just as there's a conspiracy to hide the fact that no plane ever flew into the Pentagon, and that the towers didn't fall down because of a fire, because jet fuel burns at a certain temperature, and that temperature doesn't melt steel, and the steel inside of the building of the World Trade Centers was never melted by jet fuel, because it doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel. And so that's another lie, or two more lies. That's three lies, and it's all a pack of lies. That's what it comes down to. According to the Fatimis, there's a whole ideal system. When you look deep and you dig far enough, that's called mathal, which is a resemblance, means mathal is a resemblance to something else. It's something exactly like it, but it's not necessarily the same. Here on earth, there's a corresponding system. It's called mamthul, which is representative of the ideal of what is symbolized. To understand that it is necessary, you have to know. And this is what they get down to. This is the part that freaks people out. Allah is a totally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay, is a totally transcendent being who cannot be comprehended by any human mind at all. Nobody knows who Allah is. Nobody. Nobody. He's beyond knowing. The closest Sunnis come to say, or as Allah says it rather to say, Huwa laysa kamithlihi shay'un. He's not like anything. Not like anything. You don't know who Allah is. All of those guys standing in a row praying, they're all praying to a different Allah because they don't know who is Allah. Nobody knows. This is the last and first thing you have to understand. He cannot be comprehended by any human mind at all. Allah transcends every conceivable thing and is justly incomprehensible. He has no attributes. He is not actively involved in creation of the universe. He only created the ukul, that is, the intellects that are made of pure light. And these intellects are fine beings made of light. and the matter as opposed to light is kathif, heavy and dark, and Allah, the ultimate being, has no role in the creation of matter. He is referred to by Sijistani as Mubdi al-Muba'id, the Mubdi al-Mubdiat, the creator of the creators. His role ceased with creation of the ukul. Allah moves, creates only light, and another dimension of darkness which moves faster than light, which is called the black light, and which physicists talk about as the black hole. Matter was created by the intellect. The intellect was also called, which is called Ashar al-Mudabbir, the 10th intellect. It manages the universe. And since the Ashar al-Mudabbir is responsible for the creation of matter, this universe is responsible to convert darkness into light. The corresponding being on earth to this 10th intellect is the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet is the Mamthul of Ashar al-Mudabbir on earth. He assists that 10th intellect in transforming. He is a pure being of light. That's why he says, I was before Adam was. He transforms that thickness, that heaviness, that darkness into nur. Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, shows us this right path, and this has been described by Allah. Allah calls the Prophet Sirajan Munira, the lighted lamp. For this reason, he transforms human beings into light. The Prophet is the Imam who performs this function, and he cannot be, and it is not any Prophet after Muhammad. Finished. Huwa Khatam al-Anbiya. He has succeeded in the walayat, or the explanation by the Imams of the progeny of Fatima and his daughter, and Ali, her husband, peace be upon them. But according to their beliefs, the earth can never remain without an Imam alive upon this earth, a spiritual guide, an active agent who is upon this earth. And the Imam on the earth is the representative of this intellect and commands the highest respect of the believers. He has all the attributes of that. And since Allah has no attributes, Allah has no attributes. He transcends all attributes. He's beyond all attributes. What Allah says, He's not like anything else. Therefore, the Imam, who is the Mamthul, Mithli of the 10th intellect on the earth, has these attributes here. It is this theory of attributes which was misunderstood by the opponents of the Fatimid. Even this person, good person here, has the belief in hulul, or the descent of Allah, that they bow down to that person is Allah. Allah didn't tell Shaitan to bow down to Adam because he was Adam made of clay. He told him bow down to Adam because Adam had been blown into him by the Spirit of Allah, and he told Shaitan, bow down to that Spirit of Allah. And Shaitan was so stupid that he didn't realize, even though he was a very bright being, he didn't realize that Allah was not telling him to bow down to a piece of clay. He was telling him to bow down to that spirit that was inside that clay. That's what he was told. This is what we say about this thing. This is the theory of attributes which is misunderstood by all the opponents of these Fatimid Imams as the belief in hulul, or the descent of Allah, or the transmigration of souls into the person of the Imam. As I said, this Dr. Kamil Hussein described this in his Muqaddaba to the Diwan of Sayyidina al-Muayyad al-Shirazi, the teacher of Sayyidina Naaser al-Khusro, that the person of the Imam does not in any way correspond to Allah, but rather to this 10th intellect, the highest form of intellect. The Ismailis understand in the cyclical theory of history, since the duty of this 10th intellect is to convert darkness and thickness into the universe, into light. In every cycle of history, a portion of darkness is reconverted into light, and these cycles will continue until the entire matter is reconverted into nur, and there is no more thickness in this universe. In every cycle there is an Adam who is created. Adam. And the chain of prophethood ends with the last prophet, Muhammad ﷺ, who in turn is succeeded by the Imams, and by every cycle there appears the Qayyam al-Qiyamah, the man of the day of resurrection, the Qiyamah, the cycle ends with the Qayyim al-Qiyamah, and another portion of dark matter is converted into light in that cycle, and these cycles will continue until there's no more matter in this universe and everything is light. That's what they believed, in essence. And all of this is not enough, that there is another major problem in getting to know the real thought of Nāṣir Khusraw, and that is in the problem of finding a living, realized teacher of the order of Muwayyad al-Shirazi who can explain this to you. Not to mention the very great difficulty in finding the Imam of this time and the dire consequences of not finding him. He said, "There are no more, so I was told. The tree, the hand, all are gone. The assembly dispersed, the hand concealed and veiled in secrecy. And I stood before you pale and skeletal, clad in a woolen cloak, and I kissed your hand as if it were the grave of the Prophet or the black stone of the Kaaba, and he put his hand upon his heart. 100 blessings be upon that hand and that heart, and said, I offer you the remedy of proof and demonstration, but if you accept, I shall place a seal upon your lips, which must never be broken. And I give my consent, and he affixed that seal. And so drop by drop and by day, he fed me the healing potion until my sickness disappeared." And again, we must remember that painted cakes, my brothers and sisters, do not satisfy hunger. Forever and ever there is no choice but to pack up your bag and take to the road, inwardly or outwardly, if you want to know the truth. I have reached the end of this bayan. As a gift to the reader, I have included this with this book, but alas, not for the listener. And I have appended this for you. I am now myself 75 years old. It was only 4 years ago that or 5 years ago, that I came across this ode and registered at least some of the profound depths of its many meanings. And I am very thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He granted me these years that I never thought I would live, beyond so that I was able to live long enough to read it, for it changed my life and marked a very real turning point in my path, which is the search for the Imam of this time, and I hope it will be for you, dear reader. I apologize, or listener, I apologize if this way and this talk has been far too long, but there are so many things to say, and there's so little knowledge on this subject. Perhaps not on this subject, but how one gets to it. A lot of ups and a lot of downs, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, digging here, digging there. As the poet said, Nāṣir Khusraw, Qaddasallahu sirhu, many a night I made a stone my pillow. The clouds were my tent. I sank as low as a fish. I descended as high as the stars above the hills. Now in land where water was frozen as marble. Now in the land where the dust was hot as a spark. I roamed now on the sea, now on the plateaus, trackless waste, mountains, sands, streams, up and down, precipices, a coil of rope around my shoulder like a camel driver, a pack on my back like a mule. I went my way, searching from city to city, from shore to shore. Wallahu alam. And I must mention in the completion, in case you thought everything that I said is in the past, consider this. In 1998, the Taliban ransacked, burned, and destroyed the Nāṣir Khusraw Foundation Library in Kabul, Afghanistan, which consisted of 55,000 books, which included an unparalleled collection of Sunni and Fatimi works, including a magnificently bound 1,000-year-old Quran. Well, maybe the Taliban used that as a binding as a sole for their shoes. I remind you that not all that is known is to be said, and the right time has not come for all that is to be said, and it is not all appropriate sayings that should be said to those who are not capable of understanding. Wallahu alam. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for listening.